So I just wanted to take a moment just to really thank Helen. She has organised all of the arrangements. She's the reason we came over. She reached out to us. And so I just really want to honour Pastor Helen, the great work she has done. So thank you so much for that. And can I invite everyone, if you want to come a little closer, at least come over and join us at the back so we're not so spread out. If you don't mind coming over, that would be great. But if you feel more comfortable there, you sit there. That's fine. I'll make that with My name is Ralph Esteby. If you haven't been in any of our sessions and this is your first session, I am really glad to have you here. We're going to have a great evening tonight. As I said, my name is Ralph. I'm a pastor from Australia. My job in Australia, I've got two jobs. I oversee Chaplaincy Australia, which is all the secular, I call it secular because I've got my army and they call it secular from the army, but it's not all the community-based chaplains in Australia right across 26 different sectors of the Australian community. So we have chaplains working in prisons, in schools, in mines. We have workplace chaplains, we have school chaplains, we have hospital chaplains, we have ambulance chaplains, fire brigade chaplains, all of these various chaplains that are working. And Chaplaincy Australia helps coordinate and train and develop and accredit those chaplains. So right across Australia, which is very exciting and a great privilege. My other job is that I have been involved for the last 15 years in the Australian military as a chaplain, as a uniformed chaplain. So I had the opportunity to work with army units right across the country in Australia, but also on deployment, going wherever they went and supporting them in the midst of everything they were experiencing. And so in the context of that, learned a lot about trauma, learned a lot about grief, loss, and how people can respond and recover from it. And Pastor Anne and myself over the last few days have been sharing about trauma in some depth, and we've also talked about grief and loss. And so if you haven't been to all of the sessions, we will be able to provide you some notes from some of the other sessions. So Kathy is behind us and she will be taking email addresses from everyone, and we will send you basically a copy of our slides from the last 3 days, because we want you to be equipped. Our heart is actually so that you might be able to help people go forward. But tonight I want to look at a different subject that we've covered before. I want to look at the subject that is actually called the dangers of recovery ministry. I want to think about some of the things which could be the things we need to be aware of in recovery ministry. So when I say recovery ministry, I'm talking about anyone who is involved in helping other people in any way. So if you have been helping people with buildings, if you've been helping people with physical needs, if you've been helping people with spiritual needs, if you've been helping people in any way over the last 6 weeks, you are in what I call recovery ministry. It's an issue of trying to get people to a place where they are better off. But there are some actual dangerous things that can take place in that recovery ministry. And I want to zero in on that. And so I want to speak to you maybe for about 40 minutes. So I'm going to try and finish by no later than 8 o'clock tonight. Okay, I want to get you out of here. It's Saturday night. But I want to make the most of the time we have together. So I want us to explore some of these things which I have found, and some others might have found, are actually issues. So some of the subjects I want to talk about are boundaries, our limitations, what we can do and what we can't do, and self-care. So they all sort of relate together a little bit, and I want to make sure that you are doing it in a healthy way. One of the biggest problems with recovery ministry or helping people, any helping industry, is that often the helpers end up drying out or burning out. Okay, so they either lose their enthusiasm or they work so hard that they have no energy left and they can't keep going. Now, I have been in recovery ministry and pastoral ministry for about 37 years. And I'm feeling today, I'm feeling a little tired, but I'm feeling pretty refreshed still. And I'm pretty enthusiastic about that role. That's not to polish my own fingernails and say how good I am. It's that I've learned something really important. That I have to be really careful about these subjects. I have to be really, really careful about my boundaries. I have to be really, really careful about my limitations and understanding my limitations. And I have to be very, very intentional about my self-care. If I don't look after myself, no one else will. Now, I've got some great friends, I've got some great family members who care for me and try to look after me, but they don't absolutely know what's going on in my internal world. I do. I know when I'm getting to a limit. I need to know how to respond to that and what to do in that bit. So I want you to think about that, and maybe as we go through this, I want you to think about what it might mean to have these things in place. So let's start by talking about some of the dangers. Just a quick list of dangers, and feel free to take photos, or as I said, we will send you the links afterwards. So the first danger of recovery ministry is what I have already spoken to you about, and Pastor Ann's mentioned it as well. It's this idea of vicarious trauma. Vicarious means on behalf of someone else. And this is where we are exposed to trauma because someone else tells us about the trauma. We might not have seen the issue take place. We might not have seen the earthquake. It is possible for me, who didn't even feel the earthquake because I was in another country, to be vicariously traumatized by what I hear about and what I've spoken to. And if I hear enough stories about what people have gone through and they tell me in enough detail, I can become almost, if not equally, exposed to that trauma as they are. And what is happening a lot at the moment is 6 weeks on, a lot of you have been hearing a lot of things. And in some ways, you might be even more traumatized now than you were straight after the actual events, because we start picking up on each other's trauma. And so we need to be aware of that. It's one of the dangers. And I just tell you today, you don't have to be too frightened of it, because there's an easy way to fix that, and that is by having someone that you are able to talk to, having someone you are able to unload to. I use a good illustration for this, and that is, it's like a big garbage truck. You know those trucks that go around and they collect the garbage bins and they put it in and they take it off and they deal with it? Just look at the person next to you and say, he's calling you a garbage truck today, okay? That's a little uncomfortable, I know, but you're a pretty looking garbage truck, okay? You're a good looking garbage truck. But when you're helping people with recovery ministry, that's what you're actually doing. They're putting their garbage into you. They're putting their story into you. They're putting their pain into you. They're putting their issues on top of you. And eventually, you start to run out of room in that garbage truck. And unless you go to the place, the garbage dump, and empty the truck, that garbage truck is going to be full for all the time. It's going to run out of space. It's going to run out of capacity. And that's what can happen. You could be the person who's got the biggest capacity in the world, but if you keep dealing with trauma, you're going to at some stage be full. So I have found that if I get the right person that I can speak to, I'm able to unload my garbage truck. Now, I still have some dents, I still have some scratches from some of the things that I've dealt with. I'm never going to get rid of those, but my capacity remains available. So I ask you, have you been able to empty the stuff you're carrying? Because if you haven't, you might be in danger of the first danger. That's the first thing. If you haven't emptied your truck, maybe you need to find someone. So who do you speak to? You could speak to somebody you trust. Some people say, oh, well, that's my spouse, my wife, or my husband. Can I just make a comment on that? It's like you both have a truck and you reverse them towards each other, and you take your rubbish out of your truck and you put it in their truck, and they take their rubbish out and they put it in your truck, and now you just have changed rubbish. You've exchanged the problem. It's really good to have someone outside of your circle who, quite frankly, doesn't care as much and isn't as personally involved. It might be a friend, it might be a pastor, it might be a counsellor, it might be someone you just respect and know are going to be careful with your information, but they're able to help you get rid of it. I've had a fantastic time in Vanuatu, but I have already booked an appointment with the person I debrief with for the end of next week. I've already got the appointment booked because I know, coming back from a busy trip like this, there will be stuff that it's good for me to unload so that if I get another phone call, I'll be ready to go. My truck will be empty. So that's the first danger. That's what I feel about my caring trauma. The second one is compassion fatigue. Now, what I mean by compassion fatigue, it is a phenomenon that's been well recorded. It is when you stop feeling compassionate for somebody. When you start in many of these roles, if you're in ministry or if you're in a helping service, like being a nurse or something, you can start with a great heart of compassion, a real desire to help people. But if you keep helping and keep helping and keep helping, you might find that after a while, and I'm going to be blunt here, you don't like people very much. Okay? And sometimes, even as a pastor, you could then start to feel like, I don't like people at all. And actually, I don't even want to be around people anymore. And I hope nobody makes me be around people anymore. And that might sound really shocking, but so many people give up their helping profession because of this idea of compassion fatigue. Can I encourage you that, again, talking to someone will help you refresh your compassion? So I just ask you to do a little bit of an inventory on yourself. Think about this question. Are you as compassionate towards people as you used to be, or are you less compassionate than you used to be? Do you like people more now, or do you not like them as much as you used to? Maybe this is an issue. Maybe this is something that's worth dealing with, worth thinking about. The third thing I want to encourage you that could be a danger is stress and burnout. Now, stress and burnout, we've talked a lot about this over the last few days. Anne talked a lot about stress, and I shared some things about stress. But the idea of burnout, what I want you to have a picture of is a car on the side of the road that has been set on fire. There is no way of fixing that car. The car has burned to the tyres. The tyres have burnt. Everything is gone. No one is in the heat of the fire has so compromised the metal of the car that you can't fix it. All you can do is trash the car and go away. That's what we talk about when we're talking about burnout. It's when someone goes so far, and it might be through vicarious trauma, or it might be because of compassion fatigue, or a mix of both of them. They keep going, they keep going, they keep going, they keep going, and they burn out. And unfortunately, the only option for them after that is generally to stop doing that job and to go and find something else to do. I've had friends who have stopped being pastors and who have become people who run a bar or a club in Australia because they like being with people, but they don't want to deal with the issues that they have to deal with. And they found running a bar was easier than being in the helping profession. And that's sad. I don't want anyone to burn out. So if you are busy looking after people, be aware that stress and burnout are issues we need to be careful that we don't fall into. The next one I want to talk about as a danger is actually the word manipulation. Manipulation. Now, what do I mean? In recovery, you might think that everyone who is here is doing it for the right reason. But the reality is that sometimes people can be doing things for the wrong reason. And sometimes without even noticing, you can be treating people in a way that might be manipulated. So sometimes we see this happen when there is a crisis. Some people say that they're well-meaning, but they're actually going to use the crisis to get their own agenda to move forward. Now, if we approach a crisis as an opportunity to get people into our church, we're kind of doing that. If we use the crisis as an opportunity to enlist money from the government that we're not really going to use that's immoral and manipulative. But this manipulation can go both ways. You might find that people who have been injured or affected by the trauma actually try to manipulate you. So they can be manipulating you. They can be trying to use guilt or shame or something to try to get you to do something. So we need to be careful in recovery ministry that we're not being manipulated and that we're not manipulating others as well. I've had many situations where I've seen, especially with the deaths of soldiers in battlefield scenarios or deployment situations, where families have been manipulated by the system. Is that any good? Yeah. Where people have been, so the families have felt manipulated by the system. But I've also met families who have manipulated the system. And so it is a bit of two ways. So I just want you to be aware. I'm not saying that anyone's doing that at the moment, but I do want to encourage you just to be aware. We need to be wise in what we do and how we actually act. Another issue in the danger of recovery ministry is what I call the disempowerment of the victims. Now, when people suffer in a tragedy, in a traumatic situation, they actually feel very uncomfortable. We've talked about that. We've talked about many of the illustrations of what it's like to be in an earthquake. We've talked about the shaking of our worldview. We've talked about the discomfort of grief and loss, and people feel diminished. They feel less than they were because of what's taken place. Now, there is a real danger here, because what we can do is we can take over. And let's just say Pastor Helen has been suffering from this trauma, And if I come in as someone who hasn't suffered from the trauma, it's very easy for me to dominate the situation and take even more power away from her. And even sometimes the things we give, it might be seeming to be generous, but it can actually take power away from people. And I've found so many people, when they have felt like they're in a grief or a loss or a trauma situation, feel even more disempowered by the help that is being offered. So what we have to be really careful about is that the help we offer them is actually lifting them up and empowering them. So let's make this really simple. I helped an older lady who, I was very young, and it was the first time I ever came across this problem. This older lady who was a member of my church, her husband died. And it was the first time I'd had to help somebody who had that experience. And so I went over to her house and I asked her what was going on and how she was, and was there anything I could do to help her. And she said, "Oh, I'm really worried about arranging his funeral and contacting all his relatives." And so I said, "Well, let me do that for you." So I took over the task of contacting all of the relatives. It was a silly mistake, because those relatives did not know me. And so I then spent a very, very bad afternoon on the telephone. I kept making phone calls, and they kept saying, and I was ringing them to tell them that George was dead. Okay? And they said, "Who are you? Why are you calling us? Why isn't she calling us? What makes you think you have a right to call us?" So they were annoyed at me, but then they rang her, and she was disempowered by the fact that I had taken over that job. Now, it was well-meaning, but I had taken the power away from her. What would have been better would be if I had sat with her and helped her make a couple of calls to people she knew, who could then call people they knew and pass the job on. So what I could have done was empower her. Now, I know it's a simple illustration, but this is what takes place. So when someone has lost their home in an earthquake, when someone is dispossessed, when they're forced out of an area and they're living in some other recovery setting, they are feeling very disempowered. We need to do everything we can to give them their power back as quickly as possible. So don't take over. We have this little thought in our head that we're Wonder Woman or we're Superman. Okay, we think that's what we're meant to be. We like the theme music and we want to stand there like this and look very powerful. Okay, we want to be Superman, we want to be Wonder Woman. And the reality is, we're not. Just look at the person next to you and say one of these two things. You're not Wonder Woman or you're not Superman. Just say that to them, because they're not. We need to know that tonight. You're pretty special, but you're not Superman. You're pretty special, but you're not Wonder Woman. Okay? That's not our job. We're not all powerful. We're simply here to help. We're simply here to help. So this is the issue and one of the dangers. We might be disempowering them. So think about the things you have done so far to help people during this crisis. Has that inherently empowered the person? Or have you just helped them and maybe inadvertently disempowered them? Don't feel bad. Just ask yourself the question. How can I empower that person? How can I help them make a good decision? How can I make them feel stronger? Because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to improve their quality and understanding of life. All right, so there's some dangers. I want to now just go on to the subject of boundaries. Now, I always have an interesting conversation with people when I talk about boundaries. Because what is a boundary? Okay, so when we're talking about a boundary, we're really talking about a fence that goes around a property. It demonstrates what is in one area and what is in another area. But essentially, boundaries are emotional lines of separation and demarcation. So this is this place, so this is this place, that we place around ourselves and those around us to create a zone of safety and security. They are most often invisible, but sometimes they take on a visible form and separate me from you, what's mine from what's yours, my space from your space. Now, why would I be thinking this is important? And it brings up a few questions. Some people say to me, when I talk to them about boundaries, they say, but aren't boundaries really selfish? You know, I thought we were meant to be open and accepting of everyone. Aren't boundaries being a bit selfish? I don't think God wants me to have boundaries. Can I encourage you that that's actually maybe not correct? I think boundaries are very helpful, and I'll tell you why. Boundaries enable us to form healthy relationships in which we each understand who we are, how we should act or respond, and how others should behave towards us. With healthy boundaries, we establish our personal identity and maintain our individual integrity. In short, boundaries tell us where I ends and where you begins. Now, this starts to be really important because sometimes we get confused because we're trying to help people, as I said, in this recovery setting, and we think that means that everything I have has to be given to them. And we go as far as all of our money, all of our energy, all of our emotional availability, our family needs to be pushed down, and we need to give everything away. And I have seen some really, really bad behaviour that has happened because people haven't had the right boundaries in place. So can I encourage you, you actually need to think about what about me? I know that sounds really selfish, but it's about preservation. And I said tonight's meeting, we were talking about self-care. Having boundaries is actually powerful self-care. A lot of people think, especially if they're involved in church ministry, they think they have to give everything for the ministry. Now, I kind of like that sentiment, but I want to just be careful about that. I've met a number of pastors who at times have opened their house to anyone that's in need, which sounds wonderful and loving and caring. But it comes at a cost. It comes at a cost to you, and you might be willing to pay that cost. But can I tell you, it also comes at a cost to your family, especially if you have children. I have some friends who had teenage children, and they had this pattern of just opening their home to anyone who was in need, and that meant that the children had to regularly move out of their bedrooms and live in the lounge room, and the visitors would live in the kids' bedrooms. And it was in the guise, or it was in the under the understanding that that was what we were called to do as a family. And unfortunately, what happened was the children really started to resent that. And they felt unsafe in their own home. They didn't feel like they had a choice. And I actually think that that's a sort of a boundary violation. It's an illustration. Why am I telling you this? I want to encourage you to look after your family. God's given you your family. You love your kids. You love your family. But you have to work out what is yours and what God wants you to have. And yes, He wants us to be generous and open, but He also wants us to be wise and to do it for a long time. I've got 4 kids who are all over 25. Okay, so 33, 34 down to 26 years old. And they all still like the fact that we're involved in church. They still like the fact that we've had a history of ministry because we haven't broken those boundaries. But I want to encourage you that you need to actually be intentional about having some protections in place. Now, you might not be in ministry, but you need to do this with your work life. Some people work so many hours that they've lost their boundaries. They don't have a good work-life balance. They don't have a life at all. Or the life actually comes after everything else. And they say, well, we can't do that for now because we'll do that later. But when they get to later, their marriage is default. Their marriage is no longer functioning. Or their health is no longer up to do what they want to do. And so these can be violations of boundaries which can have negative effects. So this quote says, empathy involves having flexible enough boundaries to allow me to step into the experience of another person while at the same time maintaining a sense of myself as separate from them. So one of the things I strive to do, and I think it's important for us all to strive to do, is while I can give myself to somebody, I don't have to become the other person. I need to keep a distance between myself and them, not in terms of emotionally, I can be completely open and honest with them, but they are not me, and I am not their problem. Their problem is not my problem. I help them with their problem, I support them, but it's not my problem. Because if it becomes my problem, I can get burdened pretty quickly. People often come up to me, and I'm sure they come up to Pastor Anne, I'm sure they come up to Kathy and Kim as well, who say things like, I don't know how you handle all of the weight of what people say to you. And that's because they don't understand the point of boundaries. The reality is we do hear things which are really, really hard and terrible. But we don't have to carry them because that's a boundary we have in place. We can empathise, but we don't have to carry it. It's not my burden. Because if I carry my burden, I'm going to only be able to carry a little bit, and that's not what's actually the plan. So, boundaries are created by God. Jesus actually had boundaries when he lived on earth. He had times when he was with the disciples. He had times when he was by himself. He had times when he went to certain places. He said yes to things. He said no to things. He knew what it meant to actually have a plan and to have boundaries. Boundaries actually define who I am and why I am doing what I'm doing. I introduced myself. I told you about my roles. They are my boundaries. They are the things I can do. I am not a rocket scientist. My son is a rocket scientist, but I am not a rocket scientist. The definition of what we do helps us understand how we should act. Boundaries actually help me understand who I am in relation to others. They tell me about what my responsibility is and what your responsibility is. Boundaries are actually a help about relationships. They allow us freedom in our choices. They protect us and they empower us and they even sustain us. Boundaries are very, very important. Boundaries help us. And it's really great when you start to live a life that actually understands what you can do and what you can't do and what you should do and what you shouldn't do, and you are empowered to do that. It actually energizes you. Because it's actually something really great when someone asks you to do something and you say, well, actually, that's not my job. That's kind of releasing. I can do so much here, I can do this and this, but I can't do that. But there's a little bit of a Wonder Woman and a Superman complex we have where we want to do it. Just be honest with me. You kind of want to do it, don't you? You want to be everything. You want to be that hero, and that's what is dangerous. If you want to be a hero in recovery ministry, you are headed for burnout. Now, it's great to be heroic at times and bold and brave, but you aren't big enough to fix the problem. And if you try, it'll kill you. There is no way, if I actually just took on all the pain and all the issues that I've seen, and there's no way if Pastor Anne took on all the pain and all the issues that she's exposed to, that either of us would be in this room. We would be sitting at home with our feet up on the lounge saying, yeah, we're done. That's exactly the only reason we're here, and it's no big deal, but if the only reason we're here is because we understand what we can do and what we can't do. I mean, Pastor Helen contacted Pastor Anne and said, could you come? The answer is yes, because we know we can do something because we understand our boundaries. And we were able to look at our calendars and there was room to make it happen and we were able to put it all together and that was great. But it was all an action of boundaries because we know what we're good at. There's no point coming if you're not going to be good at it. There's no point coming if you're going to be trying to do something you haven't been invited to do. Boundaries help us and define us and it makes us actually quite effective. So you've got to take that and put your context into it. So what is your job? What is your task? What are you called to do? What are you planning to do? What is your job description? And are you working within that well? And is that boundary actually functioning? So is a boundary working in your family? Is a boundary working in your work life or your ministry life? Now, I've got a little graph up here, and they're words you might not know, okay, so that's fine. I didn't really know them until I studied this, okay? You've got the word altruism, and you've got the word egoism. Altruism and egoism. Now, just to let me explain what these are. Altruism is where you are constantly thinking about the needs of others. Okay? It's thinking about someone or providing the needs of others. And egoism is where you are thinking about the needs of yourself. Now, a lot of people would automatically think, well, obviously, I should be altruistic. I should be on the altruism. I should be thinking about the needs of others. And people might say, oh, well, I don't want to be I don't want to have egoism. I don't want to be egotistical where I'm thinking about myself all the time. But can I just talk to you, let's go there, let's go to ego, let's say we're being altruistic all the time, and we weigh down the altruistic arm, think about the outcome there, where I think of others all the time. I don't think about my needs at all. So number one, my family's going to suffer. Number two, my own finances might suffer. Number three, my energy levels might suffer. Number four, I might not be able to do that for very long, so I can be altruistic for a while, but eventually I'm going to just be so toppled over that I can't function. But if we go the other direction, if we go to egoism, and we focus just on ourselves all the time, and we take that to its extreme, we won't even care about anyone else. We'll hear about an earthquake in Vanuatu and we'll say, oh, it wasn't me, it doesn't matter. We'll hear about the possibility of providing funds and we'll say, no, we don't need to because it's not benefiting us. We won't do anything for anyone. We'll become selfish. We'll become an imploded person where we're lacking any possibility of value to someone else. So what we need to do is actually have both of these like these are. We need to be always ready to do something for someone else, but we also need to be willing to make sure we're looking after ourselves. And for me, this is a great picture of what it means to have boundaries. It is absolutely okay for me to think about and look after myself. It is absolutely okay to do that. But it's also absolutely okay for me to be looking after others as well. And sometimes it means that I do put myself first. Sometimes it means I put myself second, because sometimes the balance isn't always there. But over time, it needs to be equal. And so maybe you might just think about yourself, and I'm not going to ask anyone to say anything tonight about this, because I'm not trying to make you feel embarrassed. I just want to ask you, are you working and moving in a direction that's actually going to end up with a good outcome? So if you're helping people in recovery, whether it's now or if it's in the future, are you doing it in a way that's actually going to be sustainable? So that in 5 years' time, you're still able to do it. That's what I'm talking about. All right, so I want to actually just spend a few minutes just talking about healthy and unhealthy boundaries. So this diagram illustrates what healthy boundaries might look like and what unhealthy boundaries will look like. So there's 3 illustrations of unhealthy boundaries. And it's a simple illustration, but you can have very, very limited or non-existent boundaries. There's lots of gaps here. You say, okay, well, I think this is my boundary, but there's lots of gaps. And so, I'll work a little bit too hard on Monday night, and I'm going to work too hard on Tuesday night as well this week, and Wednesday slipped in there as well. And before you know it, you haven't actually had any time for yourself, you haven't refreshed, you haven't eaten properly, you haven't slept properly, you haven't seen your kids. They start forgetting your name. They don't know your dad anymore, or your mum. Your wife doesn't recognise you, your husband doesn't recognise you. They're shocked. They call the police when you come through the door because you think it's an intruder. Okay, we don't want that to happen. That's what happens if we have limited or non-existent boundaries. Loose or porous. Porous means letting water through. It doesn't mean it's waterproof. You think you've got loose or porous boundaries is when you say you're going to have a boundary, but it keeps slipping. And so you let somebody take advantage of you financially, and then the next time you say you're not going to do it, but then you let them do it anyway. And they keep taking advantage. And you instead of providing them with a clear picture of what is good for you and good for them, you allow them to get through your boundaries. Or also, you can have a really rigid wall. And this rigid wall of boundaries is when you don't let anyone in under any circumstances. There's no room. There's no room for flexibility. And that rigidity actually pushes people away. So what healthy boundaries are boundaries which are clearly defined and actually are maintained, and that allow you to have a little bit of flexibility, but they don't actually you don't allow yourself to lose that sense of who you are and what you are meant to be doing. All right, so I'm going to provide you these notes, so don't worry too much. We're not going to go all the way through this. This gives you a bit more detail on rigid boundaries, porous boundaries, and healthy boundaries. And these are types of boundaries. So I'll just go back in case you missed it. Sorry. Didn't see there's so many cameras up there. Everyone got that one? And then I'm going to just talk to the next slide. That's all right. Everyone's ready? Good. All right, so just quickly, there are these types of boundaries that we kind of need in our life. I'm not going to read all of it, but there are physical boundaries. This refers to our physical life, our physical touch. Now, there are healthy physical boundaries. There are appropriate ways that you can engage with people. There's some people that you can give a hug to. And there's some people that you wouldn't feel comfortable, or they wouldn't feel comfortable giving and receiving a hug. My grandchildren will run across the room and they will give me a great big hug, and that's great. But if I meet someone who's not a child exactly the same age, I will not go and grab that child and just give them a hug if they don't know who I am. That's not appropriate. There's appropriate and inappropriate. And I need to make sure that I'm careful about that. Physical boundaries can be violated if someone touches you when you don't want them to, or when they invade your personal space. We then have intellectual boundaries. This is thoughts and ideas. Healthy intellectual boundaries include respect for another person's ideas, an awareness of appropriate discussion. Intellectual boundaries are violated when someone dismisses or belittles another person's thoughts or ideas. So we should be able to talk, we should be able to converse. Emotional boundaries refer to a person's feelings. Healthy emotional boundaries include limitations on when to share and when not to share personal information. Have you ever met someone who's a bit of an oversharer? They tell you much more about them than you needed to know. You know, I've met people, I've been amazed sometimes by what people might tell me in their world and what's going on. And it just does make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. Gradually sharing personal information during the development of a relationship is good, but when you reveal everything to everyone all the time, it makes everyone feel uncomfortable. It makes the person who's hearing it feel uncomfortable. It makes the person who's listening to you tell all of their secrets uncomfortable as well. All right, so more boundaries, sexual boundaries. Refer to the emotional, intellectual and physical aspects of sexuality. Having healthy sexual boundaries involves mutual understanding and respect of limitations and desires between sexual partners. Sexual boundaries can be violated with unwanted sexual touch, pressure to engage in sexual activity, leering or sexual comments. And if you've ever been the recipient of someone being inappropriate in that area, you know how that makes you feel. You know how that makes you, how uncomfortable it makes you feel, and we need to be really, really aware of that. And then there are material boundaries, money, possessions. Healthy material boundaries involve setting limits on what you'll share and with whom. For example, it might be appropriate to lend a car to a family member, but you're probably not going to lend it to somebody you met this morning who just seems like a nice guy. You're not going to give him the keys to your car and watch him drive away, but you might give it to a friend or a close family member. Material boundaries are violated when someone steals or damages another person's possessions, or when they pressure them to give or to lend their possessions to someone else. And the last one on this list is time boundaries. How you use their time. With healthy time boundaries, a person must set aside enough time for each facet of their life, such as work, relationships, and hobbies. We need to be careful that time boundaries are not violated when we allow someone to demand more time from us than they should do. So this is something that's been very, very large in Australia at the moment. It's been talking about the work-life balance and the expectation, because a lot of people now in Australia are working from home. And so some employers have been putting extra requirements on people to be more available because they're doing that. And so there's a bit of a backlash, and it's actually an illustration in boundaries where people are saying, well, hey, if I was at work normally, I'd be at work at 8:30 and I'd leave at 5 o'clock, and that would be it. But now they're being expected to take phone calls at 7 o'clock at night or 6 a.m. in the morning, and so they're starting to say, well, that's actually outside the boundaries. So we have to, now I understand that some jobs are flexible around that, and that's okay if you want to be flexible, but I'm talking about it as an illustration of boundaries. We need to know what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing. Have you got a defined day? What is the appropriate I know you might be in volunteer work, you might be in volunteer ministry, you might be in a business setting, but do you actually have some clarity around time? Do you have time boundaries? Because it's not healthy if you don't. Because I have a role, I could work 18, 19 hours a day, easy, and not get the work done. That's the reality. And so I've decided that's not sustainable. So I've made a plan. I know exactly how long my work day is going to be, and I make a plan and I stick to it. And then I have my fun, I have my time with my family, I have my hobbies. I make sure I've got a good work-life balance because I can only do what I can do. Now, it's a good level of work, it's hard work, and I'm diligent, and that's good because that's how I like to be. But I also want to make sure that I'm not violating my boundaries all the time. And I think you have that right. And I just want to empower you in the midst of this to do that. Is that okay with everyone? Everyone making sense? All right. Some of you are looking a little bit tired. It is Saturday night, and I may be violating a boundary by even having you here. Let's be real. You might be rather sitting on the lounge watching television or doing something else. So I just want to take a few more minutes just to look at a couple of other quick things, and I'll bring this to a close. So, actually, let's go to this verse. This is a verse for us to think about. John 16, verse 7 says, "Nevertheless, I tell you the truth. It's to your advantage that I go away." This is Jesus speaking. "If I do not go away, the Helper, or the Holy Spirit, will not come to you. But if I depart, I will send him to you. And when he has come, he will convict the world of sin and of righteousness and of judgment." So why would I bring that verse up right now? The reason is because this is the job description of the Holy Spirit. His job is to convict the world of sin, of righteousness and judgment. Now I checked this afternoon, and nowhere in that verse does it say, "And Ralph, me, when he has come, will convict the world of sin, of righteousness and of judgment." I'm really glad it doesn't say that for your sake, by the way. And I'm glad it doesn't say that for my sake. Aren't you glad? You can't insert your name into this verse. This is not your job. Your job is to be available and to be sustainable in everything that you are called to be. The Lord wants to inspire you. The Holy Spirit is here to inspire you, to encourage you, and to help you reach out to make a difference. And I want to encourage you that that is actually a boundary that we need to be aware of and we need to be holding on to tonight. So sometimes people will actually break the boundaries that you put on them. Now I have a boundary about my phone, okay? My phone number is well known by a lot of people, okay? Like yours is probably well known. But I generally don't answer my phone after a certain time of night because I don't want to be on the phone when I'm with my family. Now I may, if a phone call came through, I may look at it to check it's not something emergency related because some of my role has some emergency relation in it, and so I'm aware of that. But I have my phone on silent and I won't call somebody back for just something that's not important. But if someone calls me at 3 a.m, I will generally answer the call because generally people don't call you at 3 a.m. But if they call you to tell you they love you because they're drunk, okay, and it seemed like a good thing to do at 3 a.m, and that's a boundary violation for me. And so I will express to them, as kindly as I can muster at 3 a.m, I'll say to them, "Hey, why don't you call me back at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning when you're sober and we'll talk about this?" And then if they don't call me at 9 a.m, I call them because I know they're sleeping it off and they need to be woken up. And so I get my home back. But it's at 9 a.m. And then I tell them, look, you can call me, but don't call me after this time. So I establish a boundary. But what happens is they keep breaching the boundary. What happens if you have a boundary where you can come over but you don't come over at this time, or you can help somebody with some finance but you're only going to limit it, don't ask me for any more. You set the boundary in place. What happens if they keep breaching the boundary? I want to give you just some ideas here. The thing you need to do is you need to be clear and you need to be strong and say, this is what I will accept and this is what I won't accept. You have to tell them what the boundary needs to be. Secondly, you need to write it down and remind yourself that this is the boundary you set. Because some people are strong and then they forget that they were strong. They're strong and then they change it. So write it down for yourself that you've actually made that boundary. I'm not going to take calls after 9 o'clock at night or whatever it is that you decide you want to take calls. Be clear about what you'll accept and realise that occasionally people are going to break the rules. That's okay. You don't have to get angry. You just have to say, no, that's not actually appropriate. Don't call me at work because that can impact my work. It's not appropriate you call me. It's not appropriate. I can't come over just without notice. You need to give me a bit of warning. Whatever it is that they might be asking of you that is a bit more than you are willing to give, you need to teach them and train them. I want to encourage you, what I mean by this is, sometimes we're worried, but what will happen if I force this boundary? Won't they dislike me? Won't they hate me? Won't they be sad? Won't they be lonely? Who will they call? That's not your problem. You actually have to detach. And that sounds hard, but we can't fix everything. Sometimes you actually have to say, well, I can only do this so far. And sometimes we even need to decide, okay, because they keep breaching the boundary, because they keep doing it, I'm going to actually have to just break this relationship. And again, I'm sounding really nasty, aren't I, on a Saturday night? Yes?
When you're looking at sometimes there's situations where it's like the person who doesn't want anybody else to fall to, and yes, of course, you need to be putting yourself first, but is that in the point where
Sure. So, good question. The problem is often we think we're more indispensable than we actually are. And we can get this thought that if we don't help them, no one else will. And my experience of that is that often people who are doing this to me are doing it to someone else as well. And so I have found in my experience that I had one particular person who I felt very responsible for, that they were calling me at all times of day and night, and I'm the only one, and the conversation would go something like this: "Oh, Pastor Alf, you're the only one that cares. I don't have anyone else to talk to. I'm lonely, etc., etc., etc." And I was having a cup of tea with a number of pastor friends of mine in the area, and it happened to come up that this person's calling them as well, and each of them, all three of us were the only one who was helping her, the absolute important one that was being called. So when they got off the phone to us, they were getting on the phone to them. So I just want to encourage you that sometimes this is a behaviour that they're trying to manipulate you, and they don't even know they're doing it. They're well-meaning, sometimes they're diminished in their capacity. And I'm not trying to be so hard, but I'm just saying often you being strong with them, it's like with a child. If you give the child clear boundaries, they will respond positively and it'll actually be good for them. And so sometimes we have to do that with people who are reaching out for us as well. So maybe don't be as afraid of hurting them as you think you are. That's my thought.